Hey, what's up, YouTube? Decided to, well, I mean, it's not really a review so much as a small overview of a very prolific, nearly forgotten poet from American poet Robinson Jeffers. I've never heard of this guy growing up. Uh, you hear of all the other poets. You know, T.S. Eliot is actually one I've heard of when I was younger a lot, who actually I'm a huge fan of. I think T.S. Eliot is brilliant. Um, Robinson Jeffers is just as good in his own different sort of way. Hugely prolific. He did a lot of dramatic poems, verse poems. Um, I guess free form they would call them. Free verse, not always rhyming, I guess, which is actually my favorite poetry is free verse, even though I think that probably 97% of free verse is absolute garbage. If you go into a Barnes and Nobles or any kind of bookstore and you look at the poetry journal, you get to see the garbage that's produced today. All social justice, pink hair, left wing, we all know the drill. But Robinson Jeffers is a much different story. This man is not a liberal. In fact, this man is not even a humanist in any way. To call him misanthropic would not be accurate. A world weariness, I guess, would be more appropriate. But in a way, he was doing what you do. He has a Calvinist background, although he was not a believer. When you take that Calvinist or Protestant view and you take it to its conclusions, it can become self-negation. But there's another direction it can go. And this is one of the directions, which I actually find in myself to a degree, although I am not a believer either. Jeffers was a poet of the early 20th century, best known for his reworking of Euripides' Medea, which was a very successful and popular Broadway show. I mean, not Broadway show. I mean, theater production. There's actually a YouTube video of a production of it from the 70s, which is really, really good. It takes the spirit of the original and goes in it does the same things, but the way he does it is a little different. It's just great stuff. I recommend it. Jeffers' big problem, the reason why I've never heard of him growing up, was that this man was very, very critical of the First World War, of course, but so were many people. That was fine. And they should have been. The First World War was probably the beginning of the end for Western civilization and European descended man. It's that Jeffers was not enthusiastic about the Second World War. And in fact, after the war, published this, The Double Axe and Other Poems. This is the collection of poetry which pretty much ruined his legacy, I guess you would say, at least amongst people at the time. To me, his legacy speaks for itself. Very critical of America going into the Second World War. His first two poems in this, they're dramatic poems. They're poems that you could make. Here we go, part one: The Love and the Hate, which has supernatural elements, and The Inhumanist, which is a surreal, apocalyptic sort of sequel to the first one. I'm not going to get into these. These are dramatic verse narratives. These could be made into plays, videos. One of his other famous works, Dear Judas, is brilliant. It's kind of like W.B. Yeats experimenting with the nose theater, the NOH theater of the Japanese, which has this minimalist sort of productions, experimental. Uh, Love and the Hate is about an American soldier who gets killed in the Pacific and he comes back to life to slowly punish his father, who was a big pro-war guy. The Inhumanist is basically an old man by the sea, uh, watching all sorts of things going by and occasionally meeting interesting people as the world is slowly going towards an apocalypse, a human-made apocalypse. Jeffers' main themes is that humanity is pretty much a transitory being, a tragic being, an almost foolish being that doesn't really have much of a future. What he saw uh, with America particularly, but with Europe and the world, I would say it saddened him, and he had to make his poems. He had to, and his poems deal with the coldness, the sublime beauty of the natural world. He lived in Carmel, California. He lived in the California of, let's say, Jack London, who was has similar themes in his writings of, an almost Darwinistic, merciless nature, having a dignity and a beauty, a cosmic, almost a Lovecraftian cosmic quality to it that human beings would be lucky if a few of them would ever even touch it for a moment. So let's see. I like this poem a lot. I like many of these poems, but this is one of my favorite. We Are Those People. A lot of this stuff is prescient, let's say. I like prescient writers who got it right not by guessing, but by observing what was around them and applying a historical sense. Jeffers was a brilliant man. He went to college when he was 15. He could speak different languages, Latin, Hebrew. We are those people. I have abhorred the wars and despised the liars, laughed at the frightened and forecast victory, never one moment's doubt. But now, not far, over the backs of some crawling years, the next great war's column of dust and fire writhes. Up the sides of the sky it becomes clear that we too may suffer what others have, the brutal horror of defeat. Or if not in the next, then in the next. Therefore watch Germany and read the future. We wish, of course, that our women would die like biting rats in the cellars, our men like wolves on the mountain. It will not be so. Our men will curse, cringe, obey. Our women uncover themselves to the grinning victors for bits of chocolate. This is a chilling poem on many, many levels, observing what happened in post-war Germany, obviously, and applying it to this country and to this civilization. Another poem, which includes, he had the two main narrative poems, and he had these smaller poems, and then there were other poems that the publisher refused to publish, suppressed poems. Some of these, you could see why they suppressed them. I won't get into that, but I'll read one of my favorite of these. Wilson in Hell. Wilson in Hell. Obviously, we're talking about Woodrow Wilson, the president that promised to keep America out of the First World War until he didn't. Roosevelt died and met Wilson, who said, "I blundered into it through honest error and conscience, cut me so deep that I died in the vain effort to prevent future wars. But you blew on the coal bed, and when it kindled, you deliberately sabotaged every firewall that even the men who denied my hope had built. You have too much murder on your hands. I will not speak of the lies and connivings. I cannot understand the mercy that permits us to meet in the same heaven. Or is this my hell? Short, topical, as they say. Obviously, this is FDR meeting Woodrow Wilson. This was his view. Whatever your view on the Second World War is, this was his view. And this pretty much destroyed his reputation as a poet. And he had more success later as the writer of, like I said before, the production of Medea. Itself a very contentious story. Robinson Jeffers, I recommend to anyone. This is the double acts. There's so many things he did. There's actually a little book that you can actually fit. It's like a pocket-sized book, literally, that is easily found in any chain bookstore in America. I'm sure maybe in the UK also. And it's just a simple sampling of his poems, a lot of them, including some of his earlier narratives like Roan Stallion. And then the cover is a charcoal drawing of Mr. Jeffers, who died in 1961, the same year that Clark Ashton Smith died. Another great Weird Tales writer who's also an amazing poet, but I don't want to get off the tangent here. I would recommend getting that. It's not very expensive. You can fit it in your pocket wherever you're going. And there's just so much stuff. His style, like I said, is a free verse style. Some people compare him to black metal, or which is a bit silly, I guess. But just beautiful, non-sentimental, I guess you would say. There's no human sentiment in here. Is pretty much gone, but not to be a jerk or not to be cold, because it's a sort of grieving at what's been lost. I'll go to one more real quick. Another one that is one of my favorites. Original Sin. I gotta hurry up because I'm running out of time. Let's see if I can make it. Here we go. Original Sin. The man-brained and man-handed ground ape, physically the most repulsive of all hot-blooded animals. Up to that time of the world, they had dug a pitfall and caught a mammoth, but how could their sticks and stones reach that life in that hide? They danced around the pit, shrieking with ape excitement, flinging sharp flints in vain, and the stench of their bodies stained the white air of dawn. But presently one of them remembered the yellow dancer, wood-eating fire that guards the cave mouth. He ran and fetched him, and others gathered sticks at the wood's edge. They made a blaze and pushed it into the pit, and they fed it high around the mired sides of their huge prey. They watched the long, hairy trunk waver over the stifling, trumpeting pain, and they were happy. Meanwhile, the intense color and nobility of sunrise, rose and gold and amber, flowed up the sky. Wet rocks were shining. A little wind stirred the leaves of the forest, and the marsh flag flowers, the soft valley between the low hills, became as beautiful as the sky, while in its midst, hour after hour, the happy hunters roasted their living meat slowly to death. These are the people. This is the human dawn. As for me, I would rather be a worm in a wild apple than a son of man. But we are what we are, and we might remember not to hate any person, for all are vicious, and not to be astonished at any evil. All are deserved, and not fear death. It is the only way to be cleansed. All right, a little dramatic reading of it. But this is Robinson Jeffers. That's literally a fraction of his prodigious output. Go check him out if you are someone who sees things a little different than what modernity has become. I'll leave it at that. You won't be disappointed. Okay. We'll sign off.